Welcome to the Quiz Fix. I'm Cyril, and joining me as always is Olivia. Each week we dig into one real story from history, science or culture, and we close every episode with a quiz to make sure it sticks. Let's get into it. Picture this. It's October 4, 1957, and the world suddenly has a new moon. Well, not exactly a moon, but a shiny metal sphere called Sputnik 1 is circling Earth, sending out those now famous radio beeps.
And those beeps did something enormous. They weren't just a technical milestone. They told people everywhere that the Soviet Union had put the first artificial satellite into orbit. That's why Sputnik 1 is so often treated as the opening act of the space age.
Right, and the word Sputnik itself means traveler or satellite in Russian. It's a simple name for a moment that completely changed science, politics, and public imagination.
The satellite was surprisingly small. It was a polished aluminium sphere about 23 inches across, with 4 long antenna rods sticking out. It weighed about 184 pounds. By modern satellite standards, that's tiny. By 1957 standards, it was jaw-dropping.
And the launch came from the Soviet Union's Tyuratam test range, which later became known as the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The rocket that carried it was the R-7, originally designed as an intercontinental ballistic missile.
That detail matters because Sputnik was both a scientific achievement and a strategic signal. It showed that the Soviets had the rocket power to place objects in orbit. In the middle of the Cold War, that was a very loud message.
A very loud message with very quiet beeps. The satellite transmitted radio pulses that amateurs and professionals around the world could pick up. People didn't need special access to know it was up there.
And that visibility is part of why the reaction was so intense. It wasn't some secret military test hidden behind a fence. If you had the right radio equipment, you could literally hear the dawn of the space age.
Let's zoom out for a second. Why was orbit such a big deal? Because getting something into orbit means it's moving fast enough to keep falling around Earth rather than back down to it. That requires a lot of energy and precision.
Exactly. Orbit isn't just go up. It's go up and sideways at the right speed. Sputnik 1 proved that the Soviet launch system could do that, and that was a major technological breakthrough.
And it wasn't entirely out of nowhere. The International Geophysical Year was underway in 1957 and 1958, encouraging scientific cooperation and research on Earth and near-Earth space. Several countries were preparing satellite launches.
The United States, for example, had its own programs in development, including Project Vanguard. But the Soviet Union got there first, and first mattered a lot.
It sure did. The launch shocked Americans in particular. Newspapers splashed the story across front pages. People worried that if the Soviets could launch a satellite, they might also be able to launch nuclear weapons across continents.
That fear became known as the Sputnik crisis. It wasn't just about space pride. It raised real concerns about missile technology, national defense, and the pace of American science education.
You can see the ripple effects pretty quickly. In 1958, the United States created NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, to coordinate civilian space activity.
And the US also expanded science and engineering efforts more broadly. The National Defense Education Act, passed in 1958, put more emphasis on math, science, and foreign language education. Sputnik didn't just launch a satellite, it helped launch an educational push.
That's one of the fascinating things about this episode of history. A single object in orbit changed what governments funded, what schools emphasized, and how ordinary people thought about the future.
It also changed pop culture. Suddenly, space wasn't just science fiction, it was real. If a human-made object could circle the planet, then crewed spaceflight seemed less like fantasy and more like a timeline question.
And Sputnik 1 itself was not designed for long life. It operated for just about 3 weeks before its batteries died, though it stayed in orbit much longer, burning up in Earth's atmosphere in January 1958.
That short operating life is important. The signal ended, but the historical impact didn't. In a way, the satellite's biggest achievement was symbolic. It proved that humanity had entered a new era of access to space.
Let's talk a little more about the engineering. Sputnik 1 had no cameras, no scientific instruments beyond temperature and pressure data, and no propulsion. It was basically a radio transmitter in a sphere.
But simplicity can be deceptive. Even a simple satellite has to survive launch, separate cleanly from its rocket, power a transmitter, and maintain a stable orbit long enough to be useful. That's not simple at all.
Good point. Also, the famous beeps were around 20 and 40 megahertz, which made them accessible to radio operators around the world. The signal's repetition was basic, but it was enough to confirm the satellite was alive.
And because the signal was publicly trackable, scientists and hobbyists could study the orbit. That helped establish a new kind of global awareness. Earth itself could now be observed from above by human-made machines.
That may sound obvious now, but in 1957 it was revolutionary. Before satellites, humans were limited to ground-based and airborne observation. Sputnik opened the door to weather satellites, communication satellites, Earth imaging, and a lot more.
In other words, it wasn't just the start of the space age in a symbolic sense. It was the first step toward a whole infrastructure in space that affects daily life today.
And the competition didn't stop there. The Soviet Union followed with Sputnik 2 just a month later, which carried the dog Laika. The United States responded with a series of rapid efforts, and the space race intensified.
Though it's worth saying that Sputnik 1 itself was not about putting a person in space. It was about proving orbital capability. That's the core reason it's historically so significant.
There's also an irony here. The satellite was designed and launched in a period of intense geopolitical rivalry, but the knowledge it generated would eventually support international cooperation, scientific research, and services used across borders.
Space has always had that dual character. It can be tied to military competition, but it also becomes a domain of shared scientific understanding. Sputnik is the moment that tension became visible to everyone.
If you were alive then, the sky itself must have felt different after October 4, 1957. Not because you could necessarily see Sputnik with the naked eye every time, but because you knew human beings had done something unprecedented.
And that sense of possibility is probably the enduring legacy. Once Sputnik was up there, the question changed from, can we do this, to what comes next?
And what came next included humans in space, lunar missions, space stations, planetary probes, satellites for navigation and communication, and eventually a world where space technology is part of everyday life.
All of that traces back to this small, polished sphere and those unmistakable beeps. Not bad for a little traveller that was only about 23 inches wide.
So if you want one sentence to sum it up, Sputnik 1 was the first artificial satellite launched by the Soviet Union in 1957, and it marked the beginning of the space age.
And if you want the slightly longer version, it also reshaped Cold War politics, education policy, scientific ambition, and humanity's idea of what was possible.
Which is a pretty impressive resume for a ball of metal in orbit.
Absolutely. A ball of metal that changed history, one beep at a time.
And now a word from our sponsor, Fyrebox. That's Fyrebox, the easiest way to create quizzes that grow your audience. Whether you're a marketer chasing leads, a teacher building assessments, or a creator who wants more engaged subscribers, Fyrebox lets you launch a conversion-ready quiz in minutes. No code, no designers, no waiting. Try it free at fyrebox.com. Welcome back. You just heard the story. Now let's see what's stuck. Coming up, a few quick questions straight from what we just covered. 4 options each. I'll give you a few seconds to think before each answer. Ready? Here we go. Question 1. On what date was Sputnik 1 launched? A. October 4, 1957. B. January 1st, 1958. C. December 25th, 1957. D. April 12th, 1961. The correct answer is A. October 4, 1957. Question 2. What does the word Sputnik mean in Russian according to the script? A. Rocket. B. Traveler or satellite. C. Moon. D. Explorer. The correct answer is B. Traveler or satellite. Question 3. About how large was Sputnik 1 described as being? A. About 2 feet across. B. About 23 inches across. C. About 10 feet across. D. About 23 meters across. The correct answer is B. About 23 inches across. Question 4. Which US agency was created in 1958 in response to the Sputnik era according to the script? A. NASA. B. NOAA. C. CIA. D. FBI. The correct answer is A. NASA. Question 5. What was one major effect of Sputnik 1 mentioned in the script? A. It ended the Cold War. B. It launched the space age and sparked a US push in science and education. C. It carried the first human into space. D. It was designed to orbit for only a few hours. The correct answer is B. It launched the space age and sparked a US push in science and education. That's a wrap on this one. Thanks for sticking with us all the way through, quiz and all. If you liked it, hit subscribe so the next episode lands automatically. I'm Cyril, this was the Quiz Fix, and we'll be back soon with another true story worth knowing.